Welcome to the Three Martini Lunch. Grab a stool next to Greg Columbus of Radio America and Jim Garrity of National Review. Three Martinis coming up.
Hey, really glad you're with us for the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch. We've got a lot to get to today. We'll tell you more about what we've learned about who was really running the country while Joe Biden couldn't. We'll also talk about the big, beautiful bill, the good parts and the frustrating parts, as we still don't know if the Republicans will have enough votes to pass it in the House here in the next 24 to 48 hours. And we'll talk about a very much common sense decision from the U.S. Supreme Court on an issue stemming out of Maine. But we have to lead today with what I've alluded to a couple of times in the past couple days, because Jim Garrity is back. Jim is back from a saga he would much prefer not to be part of over the weekend. His house was struck by a tree, a big tree. And so the last couple of days have been spent removing that tree, and there's going to be more work to go. So, Jim, we're glad you're safe, but what in the world happened here?
Well, you know, Greg, very often on this program, we have sponsors and more than one. Ironically, my absence the last 2 days had a sponsor as well. Jim's absence was brought to you by fast falling trees. When you absolutely positively need one corner of your house destroyed. In fact, as I'm looking at the video, I bet you can see the tarp on the upper level behind me. Saturday afternoon, my wife was out of town. I always try to have the house looking nice when she comes back. Didn't really work out this time. A tree that was probably like 3 feet in diameter came crashing through the rear right corner of our house. One room is basically destroyed. The upside is it was only our walk-in closet. If I am more casually dressed in future episodes, you'll understand why. A lot of my clothes. I had 2 suits at the dry cleaners, and so thankfully, if I need some sort of like major event to go to, I at least have those suits going there. Everybody was okay. Nobody was up in that room. Had one of us been up in that room when the tree came through, like the entire ceiling collapsed. That room is going to have to be totally rebuilt. So long time list. First of all, lots of people, I mentioned this in the Monday Morning Jolt. There was obviously a lot of tree work going on the last couple of days, which made podcasting impossible. Thanks to everyone who wrote in with, saying, kind words and kind wishes. I've characterized this as an attack by Al-Qaeda. Or Oko Haram, whichever one you prefer. So far, knocking on wood, the insurance company has been great. They've already cleared out. I no longer have what felt like a sequoia on my roof and ready to, Sunday morning, I was very nervous about something else collapsing or something like that. Both of my sons were okay. We were shaken up, obviously. It was 2 thumps is like, I guess it was taking down other branches. And then the whole thing came down. It felt like a bomb, or at least what I expect would be like to be a bomb. I would also note that nothing this dangerous happened to me in either Ukraine or Syria this past year. So I might go back for some peace and quiet compared to Authenticity Woods here.
True. Well, hopefully your experience with the contractors goes as well as the one with the insurance company, because
longtime listeners might remember the fun of the kitchen remodel and how, I would make some brilliant point. So I think what Biden is doing wrong here is and I go, hey guys, we're trying. The most important podcast in the world is being taped down here. Sorry, Mr. Garrity. There might be some of that in the weeks to come. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, fact check true about the importance of the podcast, but hopefully they'll just use that as their lunch break or their snack break, coffee break, whatever they do. So anyway, most importantly, the Garritys are fine, and hopefully the house will be restored quickly. All right, it's also been a process for Laurel Libby, the Republican state lawmaker from Maine. I'm not sure if we did a martini on this back when this insanity came down from the Democratic-run House of Representatives in Maine. But Laurel Libby, they couldn't expel her. So instead, they blocked her and censured her in a way that she could not take part in debates and she could not vote. And why? It's because she put out a Facebook post showing the podium of a high school athletic event where a biological boy wins the race in a girls' event. And so because she refused to, quote unquote, apologize or take the post down, that is why the Maine Democrats stripped her basically of all her power. And so then this was run through a number of courts. As recently as last Friday, a federal judge in Rhode Island denied Libby's claim for injunctive and declaratory relief against the censure. So she immediately appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. got a hand in that process from the new head of the Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department, Harmeet Dillon, who chimed in on social media saying that the previous decision was ridiculous. And now, in very short order, the U.S. Supreme Court yesterday ruling 7-2 that Laurel Libby's rights need to be restored, and the censure against her was not appropriate. She has to have the ability to debate and vote and represent her constituents. Not surprisingly, Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor were the two who didn't want to restore those rights. So, Jim, it's good to see sanity prevail. Shouldn't have taken this long, but at least we're pointed in the right direction here.
I will understand if certain listeners are like, why are you guys saying this is a good martini? This should have been 9-0. And,
yes.
This is kind of proves that Sotomayor and Brown will pretty much give the Democrats or the left side of the aisle whatever they want. And they're not afraid of taking a dissent that ends up looking really kind of ridiculous compared to the rest of the reasoning of the other justices. The thing is, Greg, you and I think probably every listener can imagine a scenario where a member of a chamber says or does something so heinous that they have to be removed from office. I don't know, I'm just going to, off the top of my head, what if a lawmaker in their yearbook picture was in blackface or in a Klan hood, just to pick a random example? What if they were credibly charged of sexual assault? Or what if a lawmaker seemed like they were going senile, they were out of it, and they didn't know what was going on, and they couldn't recognize people they'd known for decades? Those are all scenarios where you might want to remove somebody from office, but the proper thing to do is try to expel them. And if you don't have the votes to expel them, well, then you're in trouble. However, in this case, it was just like, no, we don't have the votes to do that. We're just going to vote to not allow you to do your job. We're going to take away your vote. But the other thing is, was really intriguing is that at least there's no indication Maine Democrats recognize the danger of establishing this precedent that we don't like what this lawmaker has said. Ergo, we're going to take away their right to vote. Remember, democracy dies in darkness until someone attacks it with a chainsaw in broad daylight, which is pretty much what happened here. Listeners, readers, you'll understand why chainsaws are on my mind right now.
Yes. No, that's exactly right. And the Maine Democrats keep stepping on this rake. They somehow want this fight that's completely lopsided against them, even in a state like Maine. You might remember at that governor's conference where Trump called out Democratic Governor Janet Mills because she wouldn't abide by the executive order on keeping males out of female sports. She says, see you in court. He says, okay, fine, we're going to win that one. That'll be easy. And here they go on this parallel track against Representative Libby. So the 7 rational Supreme Court justices got this right. And Jim, if you've ever heard oral arguments recently on the Supreme Court, not being able to talk should be something that Ketanji Brown Jackson should be really, really concerned about, because she talks a lot in oral arguments. So the fellow woman thing apparently doesn't apply as long as your politics don't align. Today's 3 Martini Lunch is sponsored by BetterHelp. And I don't know if you knew this, but May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So if this is a time of the year where you're struggling with goals that perhaps aren't on track to be met this year, or you're struggling with personal or professional relationships, maybe it's time to give BetterHelp a try.
Greg, sometimes stress just kind of slowly creeps up on us and envelops us. And then sometimes it comes crashing through your roof on a Saturday night. You never know when stress is going to come into you. But BetterHelp has more than 10 years of experience matching people with the right therapist from their diverse network of more than 30,000 licensed therapists with a wide range of specialties. And BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy affordable and convenient, serving more than 5 million people worldwide. And remember, you can easily switch therapists anytime at no extra cost.
We're all better with help. So visit betterhelp.com/3ML to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/3ML. All right, Jim, on to our second martini. There's some good parts here. There's certainly some bad parts here, but we're going to be talking about the Big Beautiful Bill, which I abbreviated BBB in our email this morning. And Jim says, I thought that was Build Back Better at first. So got to be careful with your abbreviations and acronyms around these parts. But if you've been paying attention to this story, the bill is now out of the Budget Committee. It failed to get out late last week, so they have everybody come back on Sunday, and they finally got it out, and it's the Rules Committee, and now it's headed to the floor, supposedly for votes by the end of the week, and then eventually on to the Senate. Jim, this is obviously a lot of things going into one bill, which is not the way conservatives usually like it, but you have limited options for using reconciliation, which you're going to have if you want to dodge the filibuster over in the Senate. So the question now is, how conservative can you make this thing? And in some ways, it's going well, and in some ways, it's a little bit frustrating. So let's start with the way things are moving in a positive direction. Here is House Speaker Mike Johnson explaining a lot of the good stuff that there's pretty much a GOP consensus about in the legislation.
We're repealing and rolling back over $500 billion in funding for the radical Green New Deal policies from Biden's so-called Inflation Reduction Act. We call it the Inflation Act. We're ending Biden's war on American energy. We're banning Medicaid dollars from going to transgender surgeries for minors. We're canceling Biden's student loan repayment program. We're increasing university endowment tax for these big woke institutions. We're revoking tax-exempt status for nonprofits that materially support terrorism. We're doubling the jail time for leaks of confidential taxpayer information. We're eliminating big businesses' ability to engage in woke PR campaigns to facilitate refundability for green energy projects. We're incentivizing federal workforce to be at-will employees, and we're repealing Biden's disastrous EV mandate.
So a lot of good stuff there, but now the fight continues with folks on the spending hawk side trying to cut spending and those who are looking for tax relief in blue states. On the first side of that is Chip Roy. Here's what he said he would need to see to vote for the bill in his conversation with my Radio America colleague Dana Lash yesterday.
What's the one thing that, if included, would convince you to vote for it?
I mean, I think either or both the cutting down on the continued subsidies in the Inflation Reduction Act, which I feel strongly about, or something with respect to the FMAP and or provider taxes to constrain what's happening with the Medicaid scam. Those are the two things that are my biggest hangups. I think if you add those in it, I can swallow some things I don't like, but we would have made some transformative changes. I think we've made some good changes. I don't like the transformative yet, and I think we need transformative.
On the other end of the Republican Party is the big push for SALT relief, state and local tax relief. That was, of course, included in the original tax bill back in 2017. And a lot of blue state Democrats didn't like that, particularly California, New Jersey, New York. Mike Lawler is one of those blue state Republicans. He says that, New York and California added House seats, gave the Republicans the narrow House majority. It's time to reward those voters in his district and beyond, because he says the state and local tax rates are super high.
Obviously, two states, we can all agree, poorly run by two terrible Democratic governors and supermajorities in the state legislature that have passed insane legislation, increased spending. In New York, they've increased spending by $100 billion in a decade. We have the highest tax burden in the country. In my district, 3 of the 4 counties that I represent, Maria, are 3 of the top 16 highest property tax counties in America. So when you take property taxes combined with state income taxes, it blows well past the $30,000 cap, which is why this matters so much.
Really don't think it's the responsibility of every other American to bail out really bad state and local policies. Jim, you wrote about the bill in the Morning Jolt today, saying one of your biggest frustrations is that this does not simplify the tax system and, in fact, makes it more complicated. So what's your sense of the bill as we know it at the moment, and is this going to get done this week?
Yeah, just as I said, the last martini, people could argue, is a mixed martini. I'll understand if you say the current outlook, look, we're probably going to get something passed eventually, therefore it's more good than bad. But look, if you're old enough to remember Steve Forbes calling for the flat tax, or Herman Cain being very negative in German, 999, you remember for a long time, for Republicans, one of the goals was if not a flat tax, then a flatter tax and a more simpler, easy to understand tax code. I came across this fascinating interview from 2009 where a professor who studied this was like, there's probably almost every American makes at least one error on their taxes because it's so complicated. And, most of the time the IRS doesn't notice it and it's probably a wash. But, you probably have people who are paying more than they're supposed to. Which is really unfair to the taxpayers. And it's also, you probably got people who are paying less than they're supposed to, which is not good for federal revenue. And everybody, this is actually different in Republicans. It was a broad bipartisan consensus. I seem to remember the first time Trump ran, said you're going to have your tax forms will be on a postcard. It was going to be so simple, going to be so easy. Well, then it turns out there's things like the home mortgage deduction, which people really like, and child care tax credit, which people... So, there are a whole bunch of things in the tax code that make it more complicated, that make it more popular. But by and large, you can say the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act passed in 2017, aka the Trump tax cuts, did make things simpler in a couple of areas, most notably by expanding the standard deduction. A lot more people started taking it and ended up becoming simpler in that sense. But the other thing that the Trump tax cuts did in 2017 was they capped the state amount you could deduct your state and local taxes at $10,000. Now, there are some Republicans who wanted to eliminate it entirely. But there was generally a sense of, okay, if you're paying that money to your state government, your local government, well, then you're never really getting it. Therefore, we should not consider it income that should be taxed. But a lot of Republicans started complaining about it, most notably those in places like New York and California and New Jersey. And when you look at the sheer number of the GOP majority in the House, they need, if not absolute unanimous support, then they can only have a handful they can spare. By the way, I wrote in today's Morning Jolt that the House had 220 Republicans, 213 Democrats, and 2 vacancies. In between when I sent that off and when it was published, it actually changed. My local congressman, Democrat Jerry Connolly, has passed away after a battle with esophageal cancer. So by my math, that makes it 220 to 212. So conceivably, you could lose maybe 4 Republicans. But it's not looking great. You would need everybody to show up and need everything, So it's still a very tight margin there. And in order to get support from those, blue state Republicans, they've increased it to, last I saw, to $40,000, which seems like a lot to me. The editors of National Review have an editorial that spits hot fire on this topic. It speaks for the institution. I'll let you guess which person who lives in a red state wrote that, not me. In fact, one of the weird things is, I don't know about you, Greg, I've run the numbers. This would probably do me some good. And I spend a lot of time arguing against it because it's unfair to federal taxpayers. So I'm still fighting it, maybe not as full-throated as I used to be. But, the other thing which is worth noting is, again, the good news is you'll extend the Trump tax cuts and, we won't have a tax increase. But it also is probably going to blow up the deficit. By the way, the full extent of the desired, raising at one point the SALT caucus, as they're calling themselves, wanted the SALT cap lifted to $62,000 for single filers, $124,000 for joint filers. How much are these people paying in state and local tax? That's just a lot. That proposal, if enacted, would cost more than every other new idea in the tax bill put together. Again, current limit is $40,000. We'll see how it shakes out in the Senate. But I think if you're a fiscal conservative, you've never been a huge fan of SALT, the SALT deduction. You probably accept it as a necessary evil to get a bill passed. But $40,000 is a really big hike. That's quadrupling it from the current level.
Yeah, that's a lot. And there's a lot of people in states that don't have grossly incompetent governments, as New York and California and New Jersey, that shouldn't have to foot the bill. So we'll see what happens here. They obviously have to get something done. So one or the other side is going to have to give. We talked back around the time of the extension of the funding of the government that the can of spending cuts keeps getting kicked down the road for the fiscal conservatives. So is this where they draw the line in the sand? Does it come in September or whenever we fund the next fiscal year? But it's coming at some point, and in a narrow majority, it's going to be very, very difficult in a lot of ways. So we'll see how the fight goes from here.
Just one last point, which I wrote this in a column in January, and I'm struck by how much it remains true. Greg, if there had been more House Republicans elected in the last election, they probably wouldn't be expanding SALT so much. We get bigger tax cuts that are probably going to benefit people in blue states because there weren't more Republicans elected.
Yes, that's a weird twist of fate. But yes, when the margins are slim, the people on the edges get a lot more clout. Think about the Democrats when they had control of the Senate. Well, we got to figure out something to appease Joe Manchin. That's just the way it goes when things are this tight. So yes, winning elections matters. And you get better legislation when you've got a bigger majority and you can afford a few strays to go against the bill. So good luck. There's a lot in there that we want to see done, but hopefully we get this done without too many more giveaways like that. So anyway, if you want to understand economics better, because it sure seems like there's people on Capitol Hill on both sides who need to understand it better, including the very basics of capitalism, Hillsdale College is your solution. I took a number of Hillsdale College economics classes, I think at least 3. I was a history major, so I didn't spend a lot of time in the economics classrooms, but I did take them, and I learned a lot. I got supply and demand curves on day 1 on my very first class, an Intro to Political Economy with Dr. Wolfram, and just very straightforward about how real economics works. And now you can get that in their free online course, Understanding Capitalism.
Hillsdale College is offering more than 40 free online courses. You can learn about the U.S. Constitution, the stories in the book of Genesis, the rise and fall of the Roman Republic, or the history of the ancient Christian church with Hillsdale College's free online courses. Hillsdale recently launched a new course, Understanding Capitalism, and the moment they offer a course on how to spot wood rot, I will be recommending it to my next-door neighbor.
And in these lectures, you'll learn about the role of profit and loss, how human nature plays a role in our economic system, why capitalism depends on private property rights, the rule of law, and of course, freedom. Go right now to hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll in this course, Understanding Capitalism. There's no cost, and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/martini to enroll for free. All right, Jim, on to our crazy martini now. And while I'm certainly not recommending that you enrich the people who, in part, tried to protect Joe Biden during his obvious cognitive and otherwise decline during his 4 years as president, we are learning a couple more nuggets from this book by Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson. And one of the things we're learning today is starting to answer the question of who is really running the country. Because as more time goes on, we know it wasn't Joe Biden. And so in the book, it says, in practice, Bruce Reed was the real domestic policy advisor. Mike Donilon was the actual political director. Steve Ricchetti controlled legislative affairs, and Ron Klain controlled a bit of everything. He was the original chief of staff. Biden, at the time, was nearly 80 coming into the presidency. He knows what he wants, and we know how to handle him. That was the message sent internally. All of these factors led to a uniquely small and loyal inner circle. Some felt that the insularity was the Politburo's way of protecting its influence. Quote, 5 people were running the country and Joe Biden was at best a senior member of the board, unquote, said one person familiar with the internal dynamic. A cabinet secretary expressed a similar sentiment about the Politburo. Quote, I've never seen a situation like this before, with so few people having so much power. They would make huge economic decisions without calling Treasury Secretary Yellen, unquote. I wonder if Secretary Yellen is the cabinet secretary who expressed that. But Jim, nobody elected Bruce Reed, Mike Donilon, Steve Ricchetti, Ron Klain, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, you have powerful chiefs of staff. You have powerful people in the administration. We've seen folks like Rahm Emanuel and other people who really kind of crack the whip. But at least the president is aware of what's happening and is letting them do what they're doing. And they're usually at least in the loop. But in this case, Biden was basically out to lunch and these guys were running the show.
I understand when I see right of center grassroots people saying, well, if Joe Biden wasn't running the country, who really was? But we've known these names for a long time, and we knew that they were the most inner circle of Biden. I think we can throw Jill Biden in there. And let's also point out, like we were on this podcast, you and I jokingly called, Prime Minister Ron Klain. The idea that Biden was this figurehead who attended the ribbon cuttings and, did the official, read off the teleprompter, but that the actual decision making was being done by Ron Klain. By the way, I should point out that many years ago, David Frum, who was a speechwriter in the Bush White House, said to me that when the White House staff wants to steer a president in a particular direction, not just a senile president like Joe Biden, but any old president, traditionally what you do is you say, Mr. President, we have this problem and we have 3 potential options. Option 1 is to do nothing. Option 2 could work, but it's risky, and there's a chance we might blow up the entire world. Or there's this sensible middle course, option number 3, that we like, and 9 times out of 10, the president says, sure, let's go with option number 3. That might be a dynamic in all White Houses. It's really fair to wonder about this. As I'm reading through Original Sin, we'll talk probably more about this in future episodes of the podcast. But for example, during the 2020 campaign, remember that during the Democratic convention, they had to do it virtually. And Biden had these like Zoom calls, right? And we would get like 4 minutes of Biden talking with people about race relations and 4 minutes or 5 minutes of Biden, listening to people talk about healthcare. Well, apparently those things went on for hours, and the vast majority of the video was considered unusable because Biden was just staring dumbfounded at the thing. They talked about how he was saved by the fact that he was able to run the basement campaign. Greg, what have we spent the last 4 or 5 years talking about? Like on the one hand, like if you had been in a coma since early 2019, then this book is like really revelatory to you. And you're like, oh my God, how could nobody report this? Except a whole bunch of us were reporting this the whole time. It is the other thing, which is like what I did not know, and I believe is being reported for the first time in this book. If you looked at the timeline of the president's late son, Beau Biden, reports of his brain cancer went from he's been diagnosed, a small lesion was removed. The small lesion was larger than a golf ball. He was having trouble speaking. He was having serious health issues from this. He chose not to run for re-election as state attorney general, but announced a bid for governor. And less than a year later, he was dead from the brain cancer. The Biden family deliberately made decisions to not let the public know while Beau Biden was state attorney general. So when you see all this thing about the speculation, could the Biden family be covering up facts about Joe Biden's recent prostate cancer diagnosis? We've already been through this with Beau Biden and them not being straight with the public about a cancer diagnosis in their house. So, like, on the one hand, this is infuriating. Everything conservative media reported about Joe Biden was true for the last 4 or 5 years. And now it's okay to talk about it because Jake Tapper and Alex Thompson say that it's true. It's a little, as I said before we started taping, Greg, this is only the second time in the last 4 or 5 years that you and I have been right about the biggest story in the world. And the vast majority of the mainstream media was wrong.
Yes.
It was a pangolin. Somebody had bad soup in a market.
That's exactly right. And it's not because they didn't know the truth. They didn't want us to know the truth, or they tried to hide it. It's maddening, but it feels good. Feels good to be vindicated.
Better to be right than wrong. But like, it'd be nice if the American public could know these things ahead of time instead of years later. Oh, hey,
Yeah, little honesty, and you're not profiting at the time that you're finally coming clean would be pretty good. Well, Jim, it's great to have you back. Hopefully you're able to access most of your wardrobe at sometime soon, and we'll do this again tomorrow. See you then.
I just think of every potential candidate as presidential timber.
Jim Garrity, National Review. I'm Greg Corumbus of Radio America. Thanks so much for being with us today. Please be sure to subscribe to the 3 Martini Lunch if you don't already, and tell your friends about us as well. Thanks also for your 5-star ratings and your kind reviews. Please keep those coming. Get us on your home devices. All you have to say is play 3 Martini Lunch podcast. Follow us both on X. He's at Jim Garrity. I'm at Greg Corumbus. Have a terrific Wednesday. Join us again Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.